Hello and welcome to this sewing tutorial for the Chickety chicken. I'm Elizabeth from the Smart Stitcher and I'm going to be guiding you through the process today of making a chickety chicken, and your chicken will look a little bit like this one here. At different points during the filming and the video I will make reference to particular techniques that are linked in other videos, so that if you need to sort of know a little bit more information about something like tacking or anything else I'm explaining, I will refer you to a particular video. If not, stay with us and we will go through the complete process. Once you have purchased and downloaded your template, you should have an A4 sheet that looks a little bit like this one. We are particularly concerned with the rectangle here that is the chicken body, and also over in the top right hand corner the comb and the beak. Now, with all of our pattern pieces, we are cutting out on the outer line. So you're going to, with your paper scissors, follow this outer line so that you cut out the rectangle, and then also the beak and the comb shapes following the outer lines only. Over in this top right hand corner, we have some lines that are just placement guides. So these aren't, you're not going to be cutting those bits out, they correspond to these, the beak and the comb over here, which you will be cutting out. So the coloured lines on your templates are just purely there for placement purposes, don't cut them out. So once you have cut out your chicken body, we will need to get it pinned onto the grain line, ready to be cut out. Now, I've got a little video that explains how to pin on the grain line, so I will refer you to that if you're not sure, if you're new to this particular technique. Otherwise, once you have pinned on the grain line, you are then going to add your pins to pin your template to the fabric, and you want to be starting in the middle and working out to your edges, and I would recommend your pins every 3 to 4 centimeters or so. Now, a little word of warning: when you are pinning, please make sure that your pins sit on your fabric and on your template. So for example, this kind of pin would cause me all sorts of problems when I am cutting out, because it would make my scissors go very blunt should the blade catch the pin. So make sure that your pins are sat on the template but pinning the fabric and the template together. So once your template is pinned to your fabric, you then want to cut out with some fabric scissors, and you want to follow the outer edge of that rectangle all the way around so that you are cutting out the shape of the chicken body. So here we have the beak and the comb pinned on and ready for cutting. The beak and the comb don't need to be pinned on the grain this time, so I've just created a straight edge with my scissors, and I've used the base of the beak and the base of the comb as a guide to follow that straight edge and pin on into position. Some of you may find it easier to draw around the template before cutting it out. A little tip, if that's the method that works for you, is to cut on the inside of your line, so whatever you've used then doesn't show on the finished item. I'm also using a slightly smaller pair of scissors here to allow me to get in and around some of the undulations on the comb and give me a nice shape and a nice edge. So here we have our beak and our combs, and I have pinned them in position using the template as a guide as to the correct position to put them into. I made sure that my edges were lined up, so the edge of the fabric, the edge of the comb, the edge of the beak and the edge of the fabric. Now, this isn't set in stone. If you wish to move the beak or the comb up or down, go for it. I quite like the position I've got mine in, and I don't want to get the upper part of my comb trapped in my seam allowance, so what I'm going to do is just fold that over and pin it so that it is out of the way, and it will be as we've positioned it on the finished item, but for the purposes of sewing it all together, we don't want that bit to get caught in our machining. The next thing that we need to do is to fold our chicken in half, and we want to line up the short edges. So we want the corners, we want the edges to be parallel. Now we are concerned with the beak edge, which is this top edge here, and the comb edge, which is this edge on the right hand side. What we want to do now is pin and tack these two sides only. So we've added our pins to secure our beak and our comb edges, and we're now going to tack just those two edges only. This edge here at the bottom is the base, and we're concerned with that in the next step, so ignore that for now and just focus on the beak and the comb. If you're new to tacking, I have created a little short video just to show you the process of tacking and how to do it to hold your sewing ready for machining. So please refer to that if you're not sure. Otherwise, let's get our chicken body and things tacked together. There we have it. We can now cut off our thread. We can remove our pins, and we are ready to get onto the sewing machine. Right, there we go. Make sure that all of your pins are out, and you don't want anything like that to get trapped under the sewing machine. So there we go, we're all ready for sewing. So here we have the machined sides of our chicken body. So we've got our beak side and we've got our comb side. I've also deliberately used a darker colour thread for the purposes of the video so that it's easier for you to see. If I was just doing this at home, I would use a red or a colour that matched really nicely with the chicken body. I've also removed my tacking and just very lightly with the tip of the iron just pressed the stitches on the beak side and the comb side, making sure that I don't iron the fold of the fabric. We don't want to do that at this particular point. Now we're going to create that pyramid shape which gives us our chicken body. In the fold of the fabric down at the base side, what I've done, and this is our base side here, is I've popped a pin. Now I'm going to bring that pin towards this seam. So I'm just going to change the angle slightly to do this, but I'm bringing the pin towards the seam, and then that is going to give us our pyramid shape. So once they are level, I'm then going to place some pins in the fabric, and I'm going to then just repeat that pinning and tacking process on the base side of our chicken. Now I have finished my tacking on the base of my chicken. I've also just flattened out the central seam here because it helps me then work out where I want my turning gap markers to go. Now these are approximately 2 centimeters either side of this seam, so I've gone 2 centimeters to the right and 2 centimeters to the left. Now the next thing we're going to do is machine our chicken. Now these markers are going to be really important because the middle section in between those markers we're not going to sew, but we're going to sew on our seam allowance on that 1 centimeter line from one side of our base to the marker, stop, start again at the other marker, continue to the edge of the base. Whenever you start sewing on a sewing machine, it's always a really good idea to do a reverse stitch over your starting and finishing stitches so that you can secure your thread, and that's going to be really important to do here. So here we have our base which is being machined, leaving our turning gap open, and we've also reverse stitched at the start and end of each piece of machining, which means that when we turn it out, our gap and our stitches aren't going to bust open on us, which nobody wants. Before we turn out our chicken, we need to cut our corners off to give us a nice crisp point when we turn it out the right way. So to do this, I want to trim very close to my machine stitching, but not actually cutting my machine stitching. And I'm going to take off all of the corners. So just work your way around nice and carefully. You don't want to take off anything where there is a turning gap, because we're going to need that when we sew up the hole from that turning gap. So when you get to the beak and the cone sides, you want to cut at that 45 slightly more degree angle so that you get rid of all of the bulk in the corners. Now just do one quick check, and yeah, we are good for turning. So we've turned our chicken out the right way, and I'm sure you'll be able to see, but there are certain bits of our chicken where my finger alone can't push out that corner. So we need a little bit of help. So this is where, if you've got a knitting needle, a pencil, or even a pair of scissors, I quite like to use my scissors. I'm not going to go in and to create a hole. I'm just very gently pushing from the inside, you can just see there, to the outside, so that I actually push out my point. So you want it to look nice and sort of, you don't want your points squashed in really, you want them pushed out. So again, nice and gently. You don't want to see your scissors, your knitting needle, your pencil, whatever you're using, and you definitely don't want a massive hole. So just gently ease them out, and there we have our pushed out points, ready for our next stage where we're going to stuff the chicken.